Hello, everybody. Welcome to Worst Case Macchiato. It is episode 15, and just like I said last week, we are going forward, do one case per episode, just as we have found that the episodes have gotten quite lengthy. So you're going to see a lot more one case per episodes instead of multi cases per episode. So if you don't prefer that and you would rather have multiple cases in an episode, just DM us on TikTok or Instagram at Worst Case Macchiato, or email us at worstcasemacchiato@gmail.com, and we'll see what we can do. But let's just jump right into the episode with Madison's case.
Alrighty, so today I am going to do the Hangman Killer, or the person's known as the Hangman Killer, or also known as Killer Cop.
I don't know of this case. This is interesting.
So in his early life, so we'll just get into his early life. So Gerard Schaefer was born in Neenah, Wisconsin on March 26th, 1946. He was the first of three children born to Gerard John Schaefer Sr. and Doris Mary Schaefer. His father was a traveling salesman and his mom was a housewife. He was raised in Nashville, Tennessee, and later Atlanta, Georgia, where he attended Marist Academy until his family moved to Fort Lauderdale, Florida in 1960. He described his childhood as troubled and turbulent he blames it on his family moving around so much. So his childhood was troubled because they made him move.
I mean, you can't establish any friendships, any meaningful relationships. Like
he moved 3 times.
Oh. Well, what, how far apart?
I mean, he was born in 1946, and they settled permanently in Florida in 1960. So,
but I mean, really, that's his entire grade school career. That's a substantial time frame for a child's development. So on average he would be moving every 6 years. So any little friendships he made in kindergarten, gone. Any friendships he made in middle school, gone.
Sure.
Right? If you think about it, right? The last move, less significant. But just moving from where you live to Orangeville, I was 7.
Yeah.
All of my friends are gone. All the friends that I made were all friends with each other since kindergarten. Even growing up, most of the people I grew up with all knew each other since kindergarten.
Yeah.
So it's isolating. And then starting high school knowing nobody, bruh. Forget it, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
I know you wouldn't understand that because you've never moved, but...
Well, no, but as you hear more details of the story, I'll be like, okay.
Okay.
It's just I get what you're saying, but in pertinence to the rest of the information about this case, you'll be like, okay. So, although his father was frequently absent from the house because he was a traveling salesman, he had a difficult relationship with his older son, which is Gerard Schaefer Jr.
Okay.
He resented his father for the frequent belittling of him and believed that he favored his sister over him and his brother. He was really close to his mom because she was known to be very protective of the kids. As a kid, he preferred outdoor pursuits. By his adolescence, he had developed an interest in nature. So his primary interests were he liked collecting guns, hunting, fishing, activities basically that he would do with his dad when his dad was home. During that time, those were a couple of his hobbies and things that he really enjoyed that they did together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they would do that when his dad was home and not at work. Although he was not a classic loner, classmates recall him as not being, quote unquote, not being part of any clique. He would pursue interests alone, leading people to view him as an outdoorsman who held aspirations of becoming a forest ranger. So in his adolescence and high school, he developed erotic fantasies of hurting women who he deemed worthy of his contempt. The fantasies gradually evolved into him developing a penchant for sadomasochism and bondage, and deriving pleasure from inflicting pain upon himself. Occasionally, he would wear women's underwear until he achieved orgasm via autoerotic asphyxia. These rituals usually involve tying himself to a tree in rural locations. The fantasies would increase in terms of frequency and intensity with time, gradually dominating many of his waking hours. Yeah, I've seen your face. These stories, like, I pick these cases and I know nothing about them, and I like study them, and I'm like, what? Like, this is the second case that this is like.
What is
nothing.
this? It just reminds me of the summer camp the year after that we went. I'm not gonna name drop them because they don't deserve it. But like,
yeah, that camp still looks like identical.
Not surprised. The fact that they're still running.
I mean, it's obviously not the entire. It was not the entire camp. It was certain people, and they did deal with it professionally in the right way.
Yeah, but it's also like,
what should never have happened.
I don't know, tying kids to trees naked. I don't know, like
and making them drink their own urine.
Yeah, like, clearly didn't screen people properly.
Yeah, definitely did not.
I'm glad it didn't happen when we were there.
I just feel so bad for the kids that it happened to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, it just tying people up to trees and stuff, but like tying himself to a tree, like that was like the first thing I pictured was that camp.
I honestly forgot about that till you mentioned it. I'm not gonna lie.
I think about it all the time.
Yeah. I do not.
But I usually always overthink, near misses for me. But
fair enough.
Also, it's masochism, which is like
I can't say that word. I know what it is, but it just
loves to hurt people. It gets horny off of hurting people.
Yeah,
people are so weird.
All right, very. He also became a peeping Tom in his mid-teens, shocker, and developed the habit of cross-dressing.
No way. There's no signs.
I know, right? Yeah, he also developed the habit of cross-dressing, which, I mean, earlier he enjoyed being in women's underwear, so not that shocking. Sure. He dated in his high school years, however, females viewed him with disdain, so they were like, he's not worthy of respect. Former classmate Barbara Krolik later recollected, I can't remember him being friends with any of the guys. He was always on the outside looking in. As a matter of fact, the only thing I really remember is that I always had to tuck my skirt under my legs because he would practically stand on his head to look up a girl's skirt. He was considered a promising student by his teachers. Records reveal he was a member of the varsity football team during his sophomore and junior years, and he is known to have been an excellent golfer. He graduated in 1964 and briefly worked as a fishing guide in the Everglades before enrolling at Broward Community College. He initially enrolled as a social studies major in September of 1964 before switching his focus to teaching, which he had average grades. After completing his sophomore year at Broward, he applied and was accepted for a scholarship at Florida Atlantic University, FAU, in Boca Raton, where he began his studies in 1968 with aspirations to obtain a Bachelor's of Arts in Education. Now we're going to talk about his first marriage. In December of 1968, Schaefer married his fiancée Martha Marty Louise Fogg, a fellow FAU student. They briefly toured together with her singing group. The couple rented a property on SW 22nd Street in Fort Lauderdale, although their relationship soon soured, both due to Schaefer's incessant demands for sex and his spending too much of his free time hunting. The two divorced May 2nd of 1970, so their marriage didn't even last 2 years. his wife citing Schaefer's extreme cruelty as the reason for their separation. Shortly thereafter, Schaefer formed a brief relationship with a physically disabled woman whom he encountered at a Fort Lauderdale mental health clinic, although the couple soon separated. So
Okay.
we're going to kind of go into his career. So in March 1969, Schaefer successfully applied for a student teaching internship at Plantation High School. He began the position on September 23rd, primarily teaching geography, but he was fired on November 7th for refusing to accept advice from his superiors and for continuously attempting to impose his own moral and or political opinions upon his students, which had led to the school receiving numerous complaints from parents and of the pupils. Shortly thereafter, he unsuccessfully applied for a student teaching position at a Boca Raton Community High School. 4 months later, in March of 1970, he successfully applied for another teaching internship. He accepted the application and he began teaching geography at the Stranahan High School on April 2nd. Contemporary progress reports indicate that Schaefer performed poorly at Stranahan High, with his superiors noting both his arrogance and his very limited knowledge of the subject that he taught.
That actually reminds me of my visual art teacher in grade 12, I think. Her major in school, like in university, was math and science, and she was my visual art teacher. I'm like, okay.
Works.
Yeah, I love that. Like a STEM major and a STEM master's student is teaching me visual art.
Yeah, doesn't make sense.
Yeah, like she's a good artist, don't get me wrong, but it was just like she's just like, yeah, like what I really want to be teaching is like math and stuff, and I'm just like, okay, great for you, but like that doesn't help my visual art grade.
Yeah, really. Yeah, so 7 weeks after he commenced that teaching position, the principal of Stranahan High informed him the school's decision to withdraw him from the internship by May 18th. So he accepted the position. He was successful in getting the position in March. He didn't start till April 2nd, and by May 18th, his job was done. His career as a student teacher formally ended the following day.
Damn.
Shortly after the termination of his teaching career, he vacationed in Europe and North Africa before returning to Florida, where he briefly worked for the Wacken Hut Corporation.
The Wacken Hut. What is
Yeah.
that?
I do not know.
Now I gotta
Anyways,
look. Hold on. The Wacken Hut.
As a security guard, as he pondered his next career move. What is it?
So the Wacken Hut is actually a security company. It provided armed security services for many nuclear power plants, which is now called G4S Secure Solutions.
Oh, I know G4S.
Yeah.
I've worked alongside of them.
Which, I mean, it's...
Or when Red Bull Crash Ice was in Ottawa.
George Russell Wacken Hut was the founder of the Wacken Hut Private Security Corporation.
I was going to say, where does Wacken Hut come from? But that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, so after he lost his job as a teacher, vacation for a bit, he briefly worked for them as a security guard while he pondered his next career move. On September 1st of 1970, he applied for a vacancy with the Wilton Manors Police Department. He failed to disclose the fact that he had been twice fired from student teaching positions within the previous year. Instead, he falsely claimed to have acquired 2 years' experience as a research assistant at FAU and to have recently returned to the U.S. from Morocco.
And I'm going to say, given the time frame that he was doing all this, I'm going to say that they did not check their sources to determine if that was actually true.
Previous work history was not verified.
Yeah.
That was literally my next line in my notes.
I assumed, which is why I wanted to pop it in.
Yeah, and he was formally inducted into the Broward County Police Department in September of 1971, graduating as a patrolman at the end of the year at the age of 25. In January of 1971, 7 months before he began his career as a police officer, he met a 19-year-old secretary named Teresa Dean, while still working as a security guard. The two soon became engaged and married in Fort Lauderdale on September 11th of that year. According to him, his second marriage was more harmonious than his first. She willingly would agree to his frequent demands for sex, and she also shared his passion for fishing in locations such as the Florida Keys. His tenure with Wilton Manors Police only lasted 6 months, although he earned accommodation from his superiors on one occasion relating to a conduct during March 1972 police raid on a drug house. His general overall performance was considered poor. He was dismissed from his position when his superiors discovered his habits of stopping cars that were being driven by female motorists who had committed minor traffic infractions, which allowed him to then enter the plate into the system and obtain further personal details about them before contacting them to request to go out on dates with him, even though he was married. So, shortly before his dismissal, he had begun searching for a better paying law enforcement job. He began his service as a deputy with Martin County Sheriff's Department on June 23rd of 1972, having forged a letter of recommendation from Wilton Manors endorsing his application. A standard background check revealed that he had no criminal record. So they didn't even contact the other police officers to make sure that everything was good and legit. He just forged it and got himself another job.
Wow.
All right, so now we're going to kind of get into his crimes a little bit. There's a lot of them. So on the afternoon of July 21st, 1972, Schaefer encountered two teenage hitchhikers named Nancy Ellen Trotter, 18, and Paula Sue Wells, 17, while on official police duty. He drove the pair to their intended destination of Stewart, although he cautioned the girls against the perils of hitchhiking. Upon learning that neither of them were native to Florida and that the two intended to travel to Jensen Beach the following day, he proposed to drive them to the location. The girls accepted his offer and agreed to meet him at a bandstand on East Ocean Boulevard at 9:15 a.m. The following morning, he arrived at the bandstand at the prearranged time. On this occasion, he was not wearing his uniform and he was driving his own vehicle. Although he convinced Trotter and Wells he was still on duty, having been switched to plain clothes, undercover duties, that was the reason for him driving an unmarked vehicle. Shortly after the girls entered the vehicle, he deviated from their intended route on the pretext of showing the girls an old Spanish fort near Hutchison Island. En route, he again briefly lectured the girls against accepting lifts from random strangers and the dangers of being sold into white slavery. Before stopping the vehicle close to a dilapidated shed deep inside a remote forest, where he handcuffed and gagged the girls, he then took one victim to a large cypress tree close to the Indian River, tying her legs to the trunk just below her knees before binding a noose around her neck, which he affixed to a branch in such a manner as to force her to stand upon the exposed roots to counter the pressure from the noose. He then took the other victim to another tree a short distance away, where she too was bound in a similar manner, in which she was forced to stand upon a narrow exposed tree root as a makeshift sloping plinth, which is like another term for a pedestal, to counter the pressure from the noose around her neck. Both were informed that they were about to be raped and murdered. At that moment, Schaefer received an urgent radio dispatch informing him to immediately report to the police station. He left both the girls bound and standing upon their plinths, vowing that he would soon return, exclaiming to one of his captives, "I gotta go." Both girls were warned not to try to run away because I'm not going to be very far down the road, and claiming that he was going to confer with the individual he intended to sell them to. So he was going to sell them into slavery.
Nice.
So, when Schaefer returned to the forest approximately 2 hours later, he discovered that both girls had escaped. He immediately returned home to call his station, where he informed Sheriff Robert Crowder, "I've done something very foolish. You'll be mad at me." Schaefer then proceeded to explain that he had decided to teach two girls a lesson on the risks of hitchhiking, but overdid the job. He then proceeded to explain that he had abandoned the two in the general swampland area of Hutchison Island, not far from the Indian River. Crowder and Lieutenant Melvin Waldron immediately proceeded to Florida State Road A1A, where, close by the highway, they discovered a desperate, partially gagged teenage girl with her hands pinned behind her back, swimming via flutter kick in a subtropical river. As the officers slowed to a halt, they observed the distraught girl clamber from the riverbank with sections of her jeans and blouse shredded, attempting to gesticulate for their attention. Upon removing the gag from the girl's mouth, the officer heard her identify herself as Nancy, sputtering her friend was somewhere in the forest. To Trotter's relief, she was informed that a truck driver had discovered Wells staggering through the woodlands in the direction towards the highway approximately 45 minutes earlier, and that her friend was already at the police station. So Trotter was driven to the station where she and Wells recounted their ordeal to Crowder. Both girls stated that they had managed to escape from their bindings by gingerly earthing against the restraints and loosening their gags with their teeth as they maintained balance upon the exposed tree roots. They each told them about the process of freeing themselves had taken considerable time, and they had been acutely aware that if they had slipped, they would have been hanged. Both girls provided detailed description of their assailant and the vehicle that they drove before formally identifying Schaefer as the individual responsible for their ordeal. Although Schaefer repeated his insistence that he had simply overreacted in his efforts to demonstrate the dangers of hitchhiking to the two young women, his story was not believed. He was dismissed from the force and placed under arrest, with Crowder instructing his officers to file charges of false imprisonment and aggravated assault against them.
Which, like, if you want to scare people into not hitchhiking, just behave like really weirdly. Not like, possibly hang them, tie them up, gag them, leave them out there. Like, and also, oh, by the way, I overdid it, and I know I overdid it, but I left them there anyway. Like, sorry, like, what? Like, oh my god, like, how did he believe that he'd be able to get away with that? I don't understand. Like, there is no way that a rational person would believe that they'd be able to just get away with that.
Yep. About 2 weeks after his arrest, he posted a $15,000 bail, thus meaning he remained at liberty prior to his scheduled November 1972 trial. He returned to the house he and his second wife rented in Stewart. His wife and in-laws noted no change in his demeanor, believing his claim to have simply been trying to teach the hitchhikers a lesson. As he awaited trial, he obtained menial employment at Quick Check, so just like a little convenience store style thing.
Yeah.
On September 27th, 1972, Schaefer abducted two teenage girls named Susan Carol Place, 17, and Georgia Marie Jessup, 16.
He kidnapped two other girls.
Yeah, so now, while waiting for
trial on the other charges.
Yeah. The two had encountered Schaefer while all three attended an adult education center in Fort Lauderdale. He introduced himself to the girls as Jerry Shepard, claiming to hail from Colorado and stating that he intended to return there following a trip to Mexico. He likely feigned interest in Jessup's fascination with the concept of reincarnation and ESP, in addition to Place's love of music, in order to integrate himself with both girls and gain their trust. On the afternoon of their disappearance, Place's mother, Lucille, arrived home to find her daughter straightening her room. As Jessup sat upon a chair in the bedroom, both introduced Lucille to a man in his 20s, whom they referred to as Jerry. Place initially informed her mother that she, Jessup, and Jerry intended to travel from Fort Lauderdale to the beach and play guitar. Although Place's mother remained suspicious, Jerry assured her his intentions were noble nonetheless, and she noted the number of his 1969 Datsun. Police confirmed her mother's suspicion that she intended to leave home, although she tearfully assured her that she would be gone just for a little while and that she would remain in contact. The girls left the house with Schaefer at 8:45. So, like, meet this guy. He's like quite a bit older than them, and brings like him home to her parents. When police had not returned after 4 days, Lucille first contacted Jessup's mother, Shirley, only to learn that her daughter had run away on September 27th and that she likewise had not heard from either girl since. Both were subsequently reported missing to the Oakland Park police. Lucille provided investigators with a vehicle registration that she had noted, in addition to physical descriptions of the man the girls had left home with. The registration traced to an entirely separate model of vehicle belonging to a St. Petersburg resident who did not resemble Jerry Shepard, and who had a firm alibi for the date the girls disappeared. The sole Jerry Shepard registered as living in Fort Lauderdale was also eliminated from police inquiries, and by early 1973, the teenager's disappearance had largely become a cold case. So they could not, he had, I guess, stolen plates on the vehicle or something. So the case went cold. So these are other crimes that he's suspected of. Okay. So Mary Alice Briscolina, 14, and Elsie Lena Farmer, 13, vanished while hitchhiking to a commercial boulevard restaurant from a Lauderdale by the Sea motel on October 26, 1972. Again, still before he's scheduled to go to trial on his first kidnapping charges. Less than 1 month after Place and Jessup were last seen alive, their bodies were separately recovered in undergrowth close to Sunrise Boulevard, not far from the city of Plantation. Earlier the following year, both with legs spread apart, Briscolina had been extremely beaten about the head, with one blow to her skull proving fatal. Several of her fingernails had been torn from her body, indicating a ferocious struggle with her killer. Farmer had also been bludgeoned to death, so their bodies weren't recovered.
Damn.
Subsequent questioning of Briscolina's friends revealed that she and Farmer frequently visited Lauderdale by the Sea apartment, rented by the older sister of Briscolina's boyfriend, and that an individual that these acquaintances recalled as Gary Shepard. Jerry Shepard. Now we're talking Gary Shepard.
Oh, like it's actually Gary?
Yeah.
Oh.
Like earlier, he was Jerry Shepard.
Yeah.
Gerry, but now he's told
Gary now.
Is Gary Shepard. Yeah.
Which, I mean, he couldn't use a different last name. He's so unoriginal.
Right. Recalled as Gary Shepard, had been known to Briscolina. The individual, whom several identified as Schaefer, had also claimed to be an ex-Wilton Manors police officer. So 3 months later, on January 11th, 1973, so this would have been after his trial, hitchhikers Colette Murray Goodenough and Barbara Ann Wilcox, both 19, disappeared while hitchhiking from Sioux City, Iowa, to Florida. Both were last seen alive in Biloxi, Mississippi. Their disappearance occurred while Schaefer remained free prior to beginning his sentence for the abductions of Trotter and Wells. He is known to have made long-distance phone calls from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, to his Florida residence shortly before Goodenough and Wilcox disappeared, and may have encountered the two while returning to Florida. Their scattered skeletal remains were discovered close to a large tree and an orange crate in January of 1977. Both victims had been bound together with baling wire, and impressions upon the tree branches, coupled with the actual positioning of the orange crate, indicated one or both victims had been suspended from the tree as their murderer sat or stood on the orange crate. His initial imprisonment, so in December of 1972, he appeared in court in relation to the abduction of Trotter and Wells. He took a plea bargain that his attorney strongly recommended he accept. So he was able to plead guilty to just one charge of aggravated assault, for which he received a sentence of 1 year in jail and possibility of parole after 6 months, to be followed by 3 years of probation. Upon passing of his sentence on December 22nd, Judge D.C. Smith lambasted Schaefer, informing him, "It is beyond the court's imagination to conceive how you are such a foolish and astronomic jackass as you were in this case." He allowed Schaefer's formal sentencing to be postponed until after the holidays, and Schaefer began serving his sentence in Martin County Jail on January 15th of 1973. Upon leaving court on December 22nd, Schaefer informed several reporters, "I made a stupid mistake. There was no sex involved. No one was hurt."
So since there was no sex, no one was hurt. Yeah.
Yeah, because tying them to a tree with a noose around their neck, if they would have slipped, you would have had 2 dead bodies. Like, anyways.
But weren't those other girls, like, they went missing, but they were never found?
The two after.
Yeah, like Jessup and whatever,
Place,
right?
Yeah, Susan Place and Georgia Jessup.
Damn.
Yeah. So there's further developments in the case. So in March of 1973, Lucille Place discovered a letter penned by Jerry Shepard in her daughter's bedroom. She drove to the return address on the letter, 333 Martin Avenue in Stuart, Florida, only to learn from the building manager that Jerry Shepard had registered at the property under his real name, Gerard Schaefer, and that he was recently sent to jail for the abduction and attempted hanging of 2 girls. As Lucille and her husband, Ira, maybe, I don't know, drove around the county, she realized investigators had likely incorrectly noted Schaefer's license plate number as being registered in Pinellas County as opposed to Martin County, given the fact that most license plates she observed in Martin County began with 42 and not the 4 of Pinellas County, which investigators had previously informed her was the location of the plate she had provided. Once she gave that new information to police, she discovered the plate she had noted actually belonged to a blue-green Datsun registered to one Gerard Schaefer, who resided at 333 Martin Avenue. When questioned, Schaefer denied ever having encountered Place or her parents, although Lucille positively identified a Wilton Manors personnel photograph as Schaefer of Schaefer as Jerry Shepard.
Wow.
Yeah. So, on the afternoon of April 1st, a father and son searching for discarded aluminum cans discovered extensively decomposed remains of 2 individuals scattered within and around a hole among trees in Oak Hammock Park in Port St. Lucie, Florida. The location of the grave was 212 feet from the nearest dirt road, and the grave itself was 2 feet 3 inches deep. Deep scratch marks were evident upon the base of the tree immediately alongside the gravesite, close to the sections of torso had been bound to the base of a trunk. One victim wore the remnants of blue jeans emblazoned with a circular emblem of the Roadrunner, whereas the other was completely nude in a pile of clothing belonging to the descendant was discovered in a nearby undergrowth. Sections of both bodies began to disintegrate and scattered by wildlife. The location of the discovery was approximately 6 miles from where Trotter and Wells were held captive prior to their escape the previous summer. Both girls had been bound and murdered with their spinal cords severed at the lumbar and cervical section, and several bones completely severed with a knife or machete. Their bodies had been decapitated after death, and their jawbones had sustained numerous fractures. One set of remains later identified as Place had also sustained a gunshot wound to her lower jaw, consistent with having been inflicted by a .22 caliber pistol. Furthermore, sections of wearing of tree bark upon a banyan tree approximately 9 feet from the grave indicated one or both victims had been suspended from the tree long enough to leave welt impressions within the bark prior to their death, and the initials J as in like golf. Is that right?
G as in golf.
And J as in Jonathan.
Jumping, yeah, Jonathan. Yeah, it works.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I get them confused because I'm French and they're reversed in French, so leave me alone. I always struggle with those 2 letters.
It's all good.
Had been carved into a tree trunk The roots of which bore several deep knife, machete, and axe incisions contained a torn section of clothing fibers. So the bodies were taken to the Dade County Medical Examiner's Department,
Oh, so
where
it's
Dr.
GJ for Georgia Jessup.
Yeah, sure.
Presumably.
Possibly.
Gotcha.
Yep. So they were taken to the medical examiner's office, where Dr. Richard Souveron formally identified the victim via dental records and healed bone fractures as Place and Jessup on April 5th. Shortly after Schaefer was informed of the identifications, he immediately requested the representation of a public defender. The individual appointed as his legal representation was Elton Schwartz. The location of the bodies and the descendants' identities, plus the similarities in the modus operandi, so the method of abduction and murder, and the place of Place and Jessup, to Schaefer's earlier captivity of Trotter and Wells, led police in Broward County and Martin County to obtain search warrants for his house and vehicle, as well as the house of his mom, after Place's mother formally identified Schaefer as being the man she had last seen with her daughter and Jessup. So, as a result of the search warrant, inside a locked bedroom at his mother's residence, police found 300 pages of lurid stories, occasionally accompanied by crude illustrations that he had both penned and typed over the course of several years. The stories detailed kidnapping, humiliation, rape, and execution by hanging of a number of teenage girls and young women whom he routinely referred to as whores, sluts, and harlots, including two named Belinda and Carmen, and an unidentified woman who he graphically described hanging at an unknown location close to Powerline Road. Several of the narratives indicated that he had forced his victims to drink beverages, typically beer or wine, as they stood upon makeshift plinths with a noose around their neck so that he could observe them urinate prior to their hanging. He had frequently returned to his crime scenes weeks or months after the actual murders in order to commit acts of necrophilia with buried and dismembered bodies, or to extract teeth from the skull. His writings also revealed fascination with historical methods of torture and execution, and the pleasure he derived from observing acutely distressed females urinate and or defecate prior to and at the time of their actual hanging. So disturbing. This guy is messed on so many levels. Also, they found at the residence were 11 guns, bags filled with live and spent cartridges, 13 hunting knives, sections of rope, and scores of softcore pornographic magazines, which he had modified to depict nude, urinating women with bound with ropes, hanging from trees or other makeshift gallows, or bearing bullet wounds. Other images recovered were 37 black and white Polaroid photos depicting women being hung and or mutilated, typically with Melaleuca thickets suspected to be in an undergrowth area in Davie, Florida, although the focus of the images was insufficient to permanent identification of the subjects. Several other images depicted him dressed in female garments, simulating his own hanging from a tree with fecal matter smeared across his butt.
Ew.
Right?
Why?
I don't know. I deal with shit for a living, and that's the last thing I want is
That's so weird. Like,
yeah, it's gross. A letter dated July 20th, 1971, from an individual in Brunswick, East Victoria, Australia, whom Schaefer had become acquainted with as the two traveled in Morocco in the summer of 1970, contained scores of Polaroid images this individual had taken of a village in the Sahara the two encountered, following with his companion termed wog massager of both Europeans and Arabs. Several of the images depicted women who had been extensively disemboweled and otherwise mutilated with knives and axes. So inside a gold jewelry box, investigators discovered personal possessions such as jewelry, passports, and clothing belonging to several teenage girls and young women. Some of the items, such as a distinctive heart-shaped charm inscribed with the initials MTN, Investigators were unable to link to missing or murdered individuals. Others were identified as belonging to young women who had been reported missing in recent years. One gold locket inscribed with the name Lee was determined to belong to a missing woman named Lee Handline Bonadies, who had been a neighbor of Schaefer's when both were teenagers and who had been missing since September of 1969. Also recovered was a driver's license belonging to Barbara Ann Wilcox and a passport belonging to Colette Marie Goodenough, both of the women who had been reported missing in January of 1973. Furthermore, teeth and sections of bone later identified as belonging to at least 8 victims were also recovered from the property.
Wow.
So, on April 6th, they searched his Martin County residence. It yielded less physical evidence, although they did recover 2 human teeth that were stowed in a plastic capsule inside of the master bedroom, several knives and firearms inside of a shed, an extensively blood-stained white pillowcase which had evidently been washed. Jessup's distinctive suede purse was also discovered to have been in possession of Schaefer's wife. She later informed police her husband had given it to her, the item to her, in about November of the previous year, but had attempted to persuade both her and his brother-in-law, Henry Dean, to discard the item upon learning of the April 1st discoveries in Oak Hammock Park, with the explanation the police may use the item to make up some kind of evidence against him.
Quote unquote, make up some evidence about him.
Yeah, so despite his efforts, the brother-in-law had given the item to the police, so right thing to do.
Good for him.
So now we're kind of going into like his formal charges. So by May 12th, investigators had gathered enough physical and circumstantial evidence to link Schaefer to 9 murders and unsolved disappearances dating between 1969 and 1973. The same month, a periodical published a list of 28 murdered or missing individuals believed to be linked to Schaefer. The majority of the individuals hailed from Florida, although 2 victims each hailed from Iowa and West Virginia. At a press conference held on May 14th, Chief Investigator Lem Brumley Jr. informed the media that, in terms of scope and bizarreness, the case was the biggest he had encountered in his career to date. So, on May 18th, Schaefer was formally charged with first-degree murder for the killings of Place and Jessup. He was held without bond pending trial and transferred to Florida State Hospital in Chattahoochee to undergo 30 days of psychiatric examinations before being returned to St. Lucie County Jail on June 20th. The results of the examinations revealed that Schaefer to be an individual suffering from paranoia, psychosis, and acute sexual deviation, who viewed himself as an eliminator of women he deemed immoral, but nonetheless mentally competent to stand trial. At a circuit court hearing on June 21st, District Attorney Robert Stone successfully argued before Judge Cyrus Pfeiffer Trowbridge that Schaefer was sane and thus competent to stand trial. Schaefer vehemently protested his innocence, claiming the accusations against him were a mistake and informing one reporter he remained confident he would be exonerated.
Okay.
Right?
You're not getting exonerated after doing all that shit.
Yeah, definitely no.
Oh, I just realized, like, GJ makes so much sense, because his name is Gerald John. Or Gerard John.
Yeah.
That's so funny, though, because GJ is also, like, Georgia Jessup.
Yeah.
It's like a double entendre. Not, well, probably not entendre, but, like, that's just, like, double damning.
Yeah. So he was brought to trial on September 17th of 73. He was tried in St. Lucie County before Judge Trowbridge. The prosecution team consisted of Stone and Philip Shaler, assisted by Richard Purdy and Anthony Young. Schaefer was defended by Schwartz and Bruce Colton, assisted by James Brecker. As the murders of Place and Jessup had been committed at a time when the Supreme Court of Florida had declared capital punishment unconstitutional in the state, prosecutors sought life imprisonment for Schaefer. The defendant pleaded not guilty to the charges against him and frequently conveyed a distant and aloof demeanor throughout the official proceedings, often staring coldly at prosecution witnesses as they testified, or turning to smile at members of the press when a witness testified for his counsel. So he did testify, like during his pretrial hearing, where he denied culpability for the murders of Place and Jessup and claimed to be unable to recall his whereabouts on the date of their abduction and murder. Upon advice from his defense counsel, he did not testify at the trial itself, which began formally on September 19th. In his opening statement to the jury on September 19th, Stone outlined to the prosecution contention that the physical and circumstantial evidence to be presented, in addition to various forms of testimony, it would clearly illustrate that Schaefer's guilt in the murders of Place and Jessup, and that the state expected the jurors to return a verdict of guilty of murder in the first degree as to both counts. Following the conclusion of Stone's opening statement, Schwartz requested the permission of the court to reserve his opening statement until the state had rested its case. The request was granted with no objection from the prosecution. The first witness to testify on behalf of the state were the two individuals who had discovered the dismembered bodies of Place and Jessup. Both men recounted their discoveries and observations and how they contacted the authorities. Their testimony was followed by Lieutenant Patrick Duval of the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office, who described the crime scene, the evidence retrieved in the grave in which the victims had been buried. He also testified that the lack of erosion of the grave indicated the grave had also been dug into at least twice, and he also identified several crime scene photos. Place's parents also took the stand on the first day of trial to formally identify Schaefer as the man who they'd seen with their daughter and Jessup in the company before their disappearance. Despite efforts to discredit their identification by the defense counsel, both had testified that, as to their certainty, that Schaefer had been the individual who visited their house on the evening of their daughter's disappearance. And the younger sister, Cheryl, also formally identified the distinctive suede purse found in the wife's possession belonging to her sister. Also, to testify in opening day was a clerk within a county courthouse who revealed Schaefer's vehicle had been registered at his Martin Avenue address 1 month prior to the murders, thus proving the license plate Place's mother had noted indeed belonged to Schaefer. Next on the stand was Lieutenant David Yurchuk, who outlined the April 1973 search of Schaefer's mother's home and the evidence retrieved. Dr. Richard Souvrion testified as the autopsy he conducted upon the victims and their formal identification via dental records and distinctive healed bone fractures. He withstood vigorous cross-examination from Schwartz as the actual caliber of the firearm which had inflicted the gunshot wound to Place's lower jaw. He remained adamant the bullet used to shoot Place was a .22 caliber and not a .25 caliber. A Dade County medical examiner, Dr. Joseph Davis, also detailed the restraining of the victims prior to their death, the dismemberment inflicted upon their bodies, and the numerous knife marks evidence upon the victims' bones. Both Nancy Trotter and Paula Wells, his first victims, testified as their abduction and narrow escape from Schaefer during the first week of trial. They recounted to the court statement that Schaefer had made and the plans that he had for them while they were bound to the tree, that he could dig a hole in which he would bury her and Wells, and that nobody would ever find them. Their testimony was followed by a video presentation depicting the girls as they had been bound in situ at Hutchison Island. The footage was admitted into evidence by Schwartz, who was eager to illustrate to the jury his contention there had been no harm done to the girls. The defense's strategy was to discredit previous witness testimony regarding the identification of Schaefer, to contend one or both descendants had been alive after September 27th, 1972, and to contend that the gravesite had been dug on a date after Schaefer began serving his sentence in Martin County Jail on January 15th of 73. Several of these individuals included Schaefer's wife and sister. They testified to his physical characteristics and attire, differing from those described by Place's parents. They also testified on Schaefer's behalf was a hunting companion named Edward Harris, who stated he always carried a purse similar to that identified by Jessup's parents and sisters when the two went shooting. One of the final witnesses to testify on behalf of the defense was a representative from Fort Pierce City Water Plant, who testified as to records the firm had retained of rainfall in the area close to Oak Hammock Park between September 1972 and April 1973. Upon cross-examination, the individual conceded the records presented related close to the vicinity of the crime scene, but not the vicinity of the crime scene itself. I'm not gonna go into all of it, because there's just so much about obviously them going back saying this, that, and the other.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the last statements I'll just kind of say about the trial was Schwartz stated in his closing statements, as part of his closing stuff, was, "Ladies and gentlemen, they've got the wrong man, and I hate to think of that because somebody did this, but I don't believe it was Gerard John Schaefer Jr." Schwartz ended his closing argument by formally requesting the jury return a verdict of not guilty.
I bet you he would not have the same opinion if he wasn't getting paid.
Yeah, so there was a bit of a rebuttal. Again, I'm not gonna go into it because could go on about it for hours.
Yeah.
So following his conviction. So following the closing arguments, the jury began their deliberation at 3:45 p.m. They deliberated for 5 hours and 10 minutes before returning with two verdicts of first-degree murder, which Judge Tronbridge formally announced to the court at 11:05 p.m. Upon receipt of this verdict, Schaefer proclaimed his innocence, stating to reporters, "That's the roll of the dice. I had a good defense, but I'm innocent." Closing arguments to determine the sentence Schaefer should receive began on October 3rd and saw the defense argue he should be involuntarily institutionalized under the 1971 Baker Act. So that's the Mental Health Act.
Mm-hmm.
In contrast to the prosecution's argument of life imprisonment to be served in a Florida state prison. The following day, Schaefer was sentenced to 2 concurrent terms of life imprisonment. When asked if he had anything to say prior to his sentencing, he proclaimed his innocence and before requesting he be sent to a psychiatric hospital as opposed to prison. Place's mother expressed her satisfaction as Schaefer's sentence of life imprisonment, as opposed to him to his receiving the death penalty, informing reporters, "At first I thought I'd like to see him dead, but I think people suffer more with confinement. Death is the easy way out, just as long as he's never on the streets again." So contemporary statutes indicate the possibility of parole for Schaefer after he had served between 14 and 19 years imprisonment, although his presumptive parole release date was revised in May of 1979 to indicate the likelihood of parole in 2016. So he would be eligible for potential parole in 2016. Mm-hmm. Schaefer appealed his conviction, contending he had never been indicted by a grand jury and thus requesting a new trial. His appeal was rejected in June of 1974. In prison, in the years following his conviction, he maintained his innocence in the Place and Jessup murders and denied his culpability in any others, insisting he was framed by what he termed overzealous prosecutors, corrupt law enforcement personnel, and his own defense attorney, Elton Schwartz, who ultimately married Schaefer's second wife on December 21st, 1973. Although maintaining innocence and claiming to have never met either girl, Schaefer frequently and falsely described Place and Jessup as heroin users, police informants, and promiscuous. He was also known to have insulted their parents. While incarcerated, he developed a reputation among fellow inmates as an aloof and imperious individual who many suspected of being an informant in efforts to earn privileges from authorities. In the early years of his confinement, he was placed in solitary confinement for prison mail violations on more than one occasion. and occasionally for attempting to persuade members of the public to mail him female undergarments. He spent much of his time devoted to correspondence and what he termed a new writing genre. Thank you. Don't know why I can't say that word today. Called killer fiction. Schaeffer described the genre.
There you go.
As one which does not glorify violence, but enables the reader to see acts of murder and necrophilia in stark reality. Although he claimed these writings were fictional, several investigators believe many of these writings incorporated his own murders and assaults. In 1983, he was transferred to the Avon Park Correctional Institution, where he assisted authorities in obtaining sufficient evidence to secure the conviction of pedophile Mervyn Eric Cross, who had been discreetly operating an international softcore child pornography operation while incarcerated. The information Schaeffer provided also resulted in the arrest and conviction of 2 individuals in Seattle and Los Angeles, one a schoolteacher, and the seizure of thousands of indecent images of children across 4 states, and Cross being transferred to Florida State Prison and placed in solitary confinement with his mail closely monitored. Schaeffer returned to Florida State Prison in August of 1985. He also filed several frivolous lawsuits while incarcerated. One of the lawsuits filed in 1993 against true crime writer Patrick Kendrick, who responded to a letter from Schaeffer masquerading via an outside contact as a college student, purporting to seek advice as to how to overcome his intimidation when meeting the deadliest killer ever, who was believed to be worse than Ted Bundy. In response to his letter, Kendrick had tersely responded there was little reason to be intimidated by Schaeffer, whom he described as a middle-aged, pale, and doughy wimp, who preyed on victims that were physically and psychologically weaker than him. In response, Schaeffer filed a $500,000 lawsuit that was ultimately settled out of court with prejudice. Kendrick agreed to provide Schaeffer with a copy of the section of his manuscript which contained the revised list of his proposed victims, including those which Kendrick's research had revealed he could not have committed. He also sued crime authors Sandra London, Colin Wilson, and Michael Newton, and former FBI agent Robert Rossler for describing him as a serial killer in printed works. Yeah, so...
I just love when investigators, writers, anything like that, like any professional or whatever, just make fun of these convicted felons. Like, oh, he's just a wimp, or he's just a loser, and whatever. Like, it makes me laugh. Like, should they be treated like that? Probably not. I mean, I don't believe that they should be calling them that, but at the same time, I find it really funny because, like, that's the worst. Like it's like an insult to them. So, like, and they get really, like, super butthurt about it. And it's like, really? You're gonna get upset over this while you've done everything that you've done to other people?
Yeah.
It blows my mind, actually.
Yeah, so I'm gonna skip over, like, the killer fiction part. It just talks about, like, books that he's written and, like, people that have helped him, like, edit them and stuff, and, like, anyways. So it just kind of, like, talks more about his genre. So on December 3rd of 1995, Schaeffer was stabbed to death on the floor of his cell. He had been stabbed over 40 times, about the face, head, neck, and body, with his throat also being slashed, his right eye destroyed, and several ribs fractured. His body was discovered after a fellow inmate informed staff of his death. According to prison officials and prosecutors, 32-year-old fellow inmate named Vincent Faustino Rivera had killed Schaeffer following an argument over who received the final cup of hot water from the dispenser days prior to his murder. Rivera was convicted of Schaeffer's murder in 1999. He received 53 years and 10 months imprisonment, added to the sentence of life plus 20 years he was already serving for a double homicide committed in Tampa in 1990. Rivera never confessed to the crime, nor gave any motive for the murder. It is suspected Schaeffer was killed for being a prison informant, as in the year prior to his murder, other inmates had reportedly thrown human waste at him and twice set his cell on fire. Reportedly, Schaefer's classification officer confirmed that he was murdered in a direct response to his leaking confidential information to authorities pertaining to a well-respected and powerful inmate.
Well, see, the thing
Well,
is that I know that, like, any, like, ex-cops or anything like that, like, they get abused in prison. Because,
mhm.
like, that's the only, like, even though he wasn't a cop for that long, like, it's still, like, if they find out that he was an ex-cop, like, he's going to get beat up every day or whatever. Like, and no one's gonna trust him. So, like,
Well, even the fact that his, like, not that they were like children, but like his crimes were also committed against young women.
yeah,
Like,
that too.
they're still kids,
Yeah.
but
But,
so
like,
that
I
also
mean,
does not sit well with prisoners.
and you know what? He lived long enough. He was like 60 or so at the time when he died, though, didn't he? Because he was born in the
Yes.
40s.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
he was
So
almost 60, like, more than any of his victims got.
yeah, he wouldn't have even been 60, I don't think.
Well, he was born in the mid 40s and he died in the mid 90s. So I guess he was like 50.
He was 49.
Yeah, 50. Close enough.
I was just thinking because like he was older than Nan and just based on Nan's age. Yeah, so upon hearing of his death, the mother of victim Georgia Jessup informed the media she considered Schaefer's own murder a case of long overdue justice, stating, "I've always believed he was going to get this. I just wish it had been sooner rather than later." The judge who had presided over his murder trial, Cyrus Throwbridge, remarked, "He's finally gotten the death sentence he ultimately deserved but couldn't be given." At the time of his death, Broward County investigators were in the process of preparing to bring further murder charges pertaining to 3 unsolved murders, in part to ensure he would never be freed from prison. Sheriff Crowder, who had worked alongside Schaefer for 4 weeks prior to his July 72 abduction and assault of Trotter and Wells, would recollect of the case in 2009. "I think the case just made law enforcement more aware of actual existences of serial murderers. It made us aware of things to key in on when we have crime like this, where there is potential for it being one perpetrator, multiple victims," reference to his victims. Fellow panelists at the meeting with Crowder spoke as also stated that the homicide victims are not only victims, the victims are also the families. The victims are also law enforcement who worked the cases, and none of the people who worked this were ever the same again. So I'll just quickly like go through his like victims. Like I'm just gonna kind of name them in age. So in 1966, October 2nd, Nancy Elaine Leichner, 21, and Pamela Ann Natter, 20. They were last seen alive hiking in the Alexander Springs Wilderness Recreation Area of Ocala National Forest. Although authorities initially believed the two had drowned while swimming, the theory was ultimately disproven, and Schaefer later confessed to their murders. So he started his murders when he was still like teaching and stuff.
Wow.
Prior to him even teaching, actually, I believe.
Wow, that's crazy.
So now in 1969, September 8th, Lee Farrell Halen Bundes, 24, a newlywed waitress who had known Schaefer since both were teenagers, was known to have left a note to her husband of 2 weeks indicating she intended to drive to Miami but would return home that evening. Schaefer later claimed to a private investigator that Bonades had phoned him on the date of her disappearance, asking for a ride to Miami International Airport, but never called him back. Her skull and bearing 3 bullet holes was discovered in a construction site in Palm Beach County on April 1978. December 18th, Carmen Murray Halleck, 22, disappeared after informing her sister she had an appointment with a male teacher from Broward County Community College who may be able to provide her with a government job. She was last seen wearing a black chiffon dress. One of the stories Schaefer is known to have penned prior to his arrest recounted the hanging and mutilation of a girl with auburn hair wearing a black chiffon dress. 2 of Halleck's teeth and a gold shamrock pin belonging to her were found at his home. December 29th, Peggy Ran, 9, and Wendy Stevenson, 8, last seen by relatives at Pompano Beach walking towards a parking lot to purchase ice cream cones. Their bodies have never been found. Several years after his conviction, Schaefer sent a letter to his girlfriend in which he confessed to killing the children. Several investigators dispute the authenticity of the confession, as the individual last known to have seen the girls alive had observed both girls still clad in their bathing suits in the company of a man whose physical description markedly contrasts with Schaefer's. In 70, we have married Eileen Malarick, 19, and Karen Lynn Farrell, 18. Two West Virginia students, university students, were last seen alive at a theater in Morgantown, West Virginia. Their decapitated bodies were discovered on April 16th. An inmate with extensive history of providing false confessions provided a 35-page confession, rife with errors, confessing to their murders in 76, and the validity of the confession is disputed. The evidence linking Schaefer to their murders is circumstantial. He was cleared formally as a suspect in 82. In 1972, there was Belinda Hutchins, 22. February 29th, Deborah Sue Lowe, 13. March 19th, Bonnie Taylor, she was 20 years old. August 11th, Leonard Joseph Massar, 46. He was actually, by the looks of it, the first male. He was last seen alive at Riviera Beach, Florida. His handless body was discovered buried on Hutchinson Island, close to where Schaefer had bound and threatened Trotter and Wells. No direct evidence exists to indicate culpability for the murder. However, he is known to have referenced Massar's murder in correspondence following his murder conviction. August 31st, there's Elizabeth Renee Wilt, 22. October 26th, Marie Alice Briscolina, 14, and Elsie Lena Farmer, 13. December 23rd, you have Suzanne Gail Poole, who is 15. And in 1973, January 11th, there was Colette Mary Goodenough, 19, and Barbara Ann Wilcox, 19. Literature, Patrick Kendrick in 2020 wrote American Ripper, The Enigma of America's Serial Killer Cop. And then Michael Newton wrote in 2016 Hangman, The Life and Crimes of Gerald John Schaefer. In TV, there's a crime documentary series, Married with Secrets. He was broadcast on an episode focusing on the life and murders committed by Gerald Schaefer. The 42-minute episode was the first broadcast in 2017. Killer Cops, Gerard Schaefer, a documentary focusing on the murders committed by Gerard Schaefer, commissioned by Sky Vision. The documentary was initially broadcast February 26th of 2017. And then Investigation Discovery had broadcasted a documentary focusing upon the crimes within the documentary series Most Evil. This documentary, titled Sexual Deviance, featured footage of interviews with Schaefer.
Wow.
So that one is a really long one.
With how long ago that case was, I'm surprised I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
But yet again, he was kind of killing roughly within the same time frame as a lot of super prolific serial killers.
Yeah.
In California. So and it being in those ones being in California are so much more media focused because they have so many media outlets there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more high profile people out there. But he was he allegedly killed a lot of people.
Yeah, so his victim list is, they have it set as 2 to 28 plus.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that's kind of the same with Harold Shipman or whatever, because they have he definitely killed close to 50, but I think it's 48 to 190 plus. And that's that is a huge range, but they can link them because they have similar MOs, but you can't say or they were because you don't have any evidence to say that he didn't, not they had anything of these people, but just because he has an old item of this person, it doesn't mean that he killed them either. So it's
well, and the thing is he was only ever convicted of 2 murders, but they think he was obviously responsible for a lot more. Another name that he was also known by was the Butcher of Blind Creek.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was just so like dumbfounded for the entire story. Like I didn't really talk much this case and I felt really bad, but I was just like I've never heard this case before. So like and every single time that you were saying like a tidbit of information, I was like, okay, maybe I have heard of this, and then it like turns in a way that like I didn't know, and I'm like, oh no, it's not a case I know, and I was just like trying to piece it together to try to figure out if I ever heard it before, but clearly I haven't.
Well, like even like when I was like reading it, I was like, oh, I feel like I have heard of this case, and then I was like, I feel like I have, but I'm like, I don't know like a crazy amount about it.
Yeah,
So
and
I was
like
like, we'll see.
you were mid case, and I like looked up what he looked like, and like he even looks creepy.
Yeah,
Like his smile is creepy. Like he looks like an ordinary dude, like physically, but like his smile is just there's something unnerving about his smile. Like
yeah.
even if you didn't know about his actual case, like his smile is just like it's creepy.
I just like looked up the guy who killed him.
Yeah, like I looked him up too.
He literally like was born pretty much like the year he started committing his crimes, which is crazy.
Yeah, he was like basically 20 years younger than him.
Yeah.
It's just so funny because he was in prison for one kill.
For a double murder.
Yeah, a double murder.
Yeah.
And then he killed Gerard, and then he was put in prison for longer, obviously, because he killed another person over quote unquote hot water.
Yeah, they got into a fight over hot water.
Quote unquote.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just like looking him up because I was curious if he had like passed away or not, but
didn't look like it. Yet again,
no,
I obviously did not look into it, but I was just like, it's also not who I expected when I looked his name up.
He's literally like a year older than my dad, so.
Who, Rivera?
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, no, because like, most of the case that like you're like going through, he's like, oh yeah, like he was arrested in '73, and I'm like, oh my god, that's only like a year after my mom was born. Like,
yeah.
It seems like so, like when somebody says, oh, this person was born in the '40s, you think it's so long ago, and then you realize that like if he wasn't stabbed for the quote unquote hot water thing, he could still be alive.
Yeah, like he literally would be like 70. Almost 80, but
yeah, like yeah, he'd be almost 80 now. Yeah, that's true.
Because he was 40s. Born in what, like I said, 46. I think he was born.
Yeah, 2006. He would have been 60.
Yeah, so he'd be 77.
Yeah, like that's crazy.
Because our grandma was born in 48 and she just turned 75. So yeah.
Like it's so like unnerving.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the Zodiac Killer in the late 1960s. That person can still be alive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it feels like so long ago because like everyone knows about the Zodiac Killer. Like, and if you don't, you've lived under a rock. But like that person could still be alive, just free walking around because like it's still unsolved. So it's like,
yeah,
like there's been a ton of suspects, like even like recently. Apparently, the FBI identified the Zodiac Killer in May.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Okay, like this is why I hate news outlets. The FBI, an FBI whistleblower confirmed that an old Air Force veteran is a suspect. Like, stop. Like, don't say that they identified if it's just a suspect.
Yeah, I see the one you're talking about.
Yeah, he died in 2018.
That's what they're saying?
Well, the Gary Francis Post died in 2018. The theory has been put forward by journalist Thomas Colbert, who said a bureau whistleblower, who obviously they didn't reveal who it was, confirmed to him the chief suspect was Air Force veteran Gary Francis Post. He was connected to the case by a quote-unquote partial DNA sample, according to the whistleblower.
I was like those things like where it's like, all right, like if you're gonna die, just leave a note. Just be like, yeah, it's me. I did it.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, now that I'm dying, I'm the Zodiac Killer. Pieces, dude. Like,
yeah. Bye. I had a great life. Y'all didn't.
it's also like a partial. Okay. Says this random guy who didn't actually give you the report. Like,
Yeah.
again, like, debatable. You know, like, it could be a journalist who just wants his 5 minutes of fame being the first person that claimed this theory, and he wants to be famous for it, you know, like.
Yeah.
And this whistleblower could be someone who has no idea what the hell is going on and is in the FBI for a completely different, like, jurisdiction, and he literally just saw them on the list. Like, like, you have no idea, but, like, it's just crazy that some of these cases, like, these people could still be alive.
Well, like, literally, so just the other day, I was, like, on the Facebook and just scrolling, and, like, there was an Ottawa lady charged with a bunch of crimes, 97. But they were crimes that dated back to, like, her...
Like, in her, like, 20s
position.
and 30s.
What's her?
Was she, like, 20 or 30 years old when she committed them?
I don't know how old she was, because it didn't really say, but it had the charges stemmed for her part and her role in things that happened at residential schools.
Which, I mean, when was the last residential school closed?
Not that long ago.
Yeah, 1996. Like,
literally a year before I was born.
Yeah, like Devin was already born when a residential school was still functioning. But that's sad.
Yeah. Okay. She's scheduled to report it in court in Moosonee in December. Good luck getting there, because Moosonee in the winter, good luck. It's all ice roads to get there.
For real. I was just thinking that too.
Police said the charges are unproven. She was named separately on a list of alleged perpetrators. But I mean, like, she lived her entire life, like, free life. Like, you're literally going to charge this 97-year-old. She could die any day.
Like, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's still like a win.
Yeah, so, and it says, like, that Corkman said that the filing of charges may provide closure to the survivors that she had already abused, but also expressed doubt that she would ever be incarcerated given that her advanced age. But yeah. Which is true.
Which she's the 8th person charged for alleged abuses at that specific residential school and everything.
Is she? Yeah. I mean, it just came up because, like, obviously Ottawa is so close to home for me. But.
Yeah. Yeah, she's apparently the 8th out of that specific residential school that's been charged.
Yeah, I believe that. Which, like, usually there's, like, a statute of limitations, but obviously, like,
yeah, not for this though. Like, this is like very specific because like, this is all about retribution.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, for sure.
So, like, this is more of like a social and like reparation of social injustice.
We want to wrap this up.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for watching this watching.
Good job.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Worst Case Macchiato. You can get in contact with us on Instagram at Worst Case Macchiato or to our Gmail at worstcasemacchiato@gmail.com. You can recommend cases. Let us know of any facts or details that we might have missed. Or if you just want to get in contact with us about any of your experiences, that would be cool too. Please give us a rating on podcasting platforms such as Apple Podcasts, as well as give us a follow on Spotify. And hopefully we'll see you in the next one. Bye!